of 2024. We are doing 5 this year, and if you want to put the other ones on your calendars, there are bookmarks on your way out with the dates of all of our future presentations. I also want to tell you that the book talks are sponsored by the Friends of the Library, and you just happen to be attending on the first day of the Friends of the Library membership drive. So if you are not a member of Friends of the Library, we would love it if you would join. The Friends of the Library is the 501c3 not-for-profit fundraising organization that supports our library. So any dues monies that we get, and dues are $10 per year, any dues monies that we receive go toward book purchases, toward events such as our book talks, toward, we have one annual volunteer recognition for all of our volunteers that work in the library. So your dues money are certainly very well spent. So consider please joining if you are not a current member of Friends of the Library. So this evening, Elaine and I are going to present to you David Copperfield and Demon Copperhead. Oh, thank you. See, I have a buddy here to help me out. That is so good. I do want to put one other advertisement in for the Friends of the Library. Do any of you belong to book clubs that you attend routinely? Yes, 1, 2, 3. Okay. The Friends of the Library has issued a challenge to all of the book clubs here at Robeson that allows the book clubs potentially to win free books for their own club. The book club challenge runs during our membership drive from May 1 to June 30th, and your book club can recruit new members to join Friends of the Library. The book club that brings in the most new members to Friends of the Library will receive 8 books from us. 2 copies of each of the books that you are reading for your next 4 series. So think about that and help recruit. Thank you for reminding me of that. So Elaine Cushmal and I are here to present David Copperfield and Demon Copperhead. And since I'm standing, I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. Not only am I'm Deborah Deal, not only am I Vice Chair of the Friends of the Library this year, but I love to read, and that's all I want to tell you about why I'm here presenting Demon Copperhead. I loved the book. I thought it was just extremely thought-provoking, and an amazing job that she did, and why it relates to David Copperfield. So Elaine, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Elaine Cushmal, and we both agreed that one of the most important things to tell about ourselves is that we love to read. So we both do, and I'm president, I've been president this past year of the Friends of the Library, and we'll be turning over that leadership job to Deborah in July. And what else did I want to say? Oh, we're both also, besides being in Friends of the Library, we're both very active volunteers of the library itself. I wanted to say that.
Yep,
yes.
you did.
Yes. And I'm going to say, now who read, let me just advance this here. This is what we're going to try to cover over the next hour and a half. How many read this back in the day? At least half of y'all, it looks like. You guys didn't have to read this in high school? Wow. Well, I know I certainly read it in high school, but I did enjoy the movie that we had gotten here that a few people probably got to use. They did a very good job of reminding me about it. I had tried to read Demon Copperhead earlier and couldn't get into it. But then when I really had reminded myself of the David Copperfield story, it made it more fun to read Demon Copperhead because I was picking up on the tie-ins to the two books. So who has read this? Okay. And so we're gonna delve into this tonight. First, I was going to talk just a little bit about. We always have to cover our authors. So, my favorite author that I'm usually talking about is Jane Austen. So she was only about 5 years old when, he was only about 5 years old when she died. So she was prior to him in his his early life is very much, David Copperfield is the book that he claimed was closest to his heart. And it was the most like his life. And I'm sure that's why he liked it so much. And he was well into his career by the time he wrote it. Early in life, he had some schooling. And then his father went into debtor's prison. And he was 10 or 11, and that's old enough to go to work in this age in England. David's mother and younger siblings went into the prison with their father. That was kind of common. It was, I don't think it's a prison like what we think of, but they must have had some kind of room or something they kind of lived in. But David was sent off to, like I said, work and try to have some support for his family. His father did get out eventually. He did have a little bit more schooling, but not a whole lot. He clerked in a law office, taught himself shorthand, and became a reporter in the House of Commons. And they were really amazed at how fast he could take down stories because he'd learned the shorthand. By 1833, he was selling humorous pieces about London life to the monthly magazine, and by the age of 25, he was a national figure in Great Britain. You know, there weren't any pop stars. There wasn't so much that we have now that was not there yet. And he had gotten very good at mimicking voices. So he would go around and do readings and use his different voices. And this was high entertainment when you didn't have a TV or a movie or the kind of things that we have today. From there, he progressed to writing book-length stories, usually published in serial form. So just like our TV shows, you know, you always have to, the TV shows that are series, they always have to end on a cliffhanger, you know, so that you're waiting for that next one to come out. You know, if you're watching old-fashioned TV where it's like only comes out once a week. Not one of the kind you can binge on. And so he was that popular. He produced material at an amazing rate. During the same time, he married, and he and his wife had 10 children. So it's not like he didn't have a lot going on in his life. In 1842, he came to the United States and made a celebrity tour, made a bunch of money, people coming to see him. Mitch, you said you were going to thump him. His eyes look closed. Oh, okay, right, okay. That's my husband, that's why, yeah. And the appearance of the Christmas Carol, you know the Christmas Carol, in 1843 sealed his position as the most widely popular writer of his time. So at this point, it's not just in Great Britain, it's the U.S., and he's just really a big guy. In 1850, then, he published David Copperfield. So he's been quite a few years in his career now, and his mostly had been doing humorous things, the Pickwick Papers and Martin Chuzzlewit, some of these kind of things, and he does this a little bit more serious book that's highly tied to his life and is looking at social issues, the children being worked when they're so young and not having a support system at all. And this seems to have been a turning point in his writing. From this time on, his novels are harsher and a little bit darker in nature. And his nonstop working earlier in life and continuing may have contributed to his eroded health. He died in 1870 at the age of 58. So we would certainly consider that pretty young.
Did his writing make him wealthy or comfortable or?
Well, it did make him wealthy, but then, you know, one of those things that makes you not as wealthy when you've been wealthy is getting divorced. He didn't exactly get divorced, but he left his wife and children because he fell in love with a young actress that he met working on in a theater production. And I think that sort of hurt, trying to still support them and then this other, because he did come to the United States for another tour later in life trying to make money that he needed. But he did actually leave a good amount of money when he died. So he did pretty well, yeah. Okay, I just wanted to, of course there have been many publications over the years of his books. Since it's still a classic, they still keep coming out, you know, with new copies, new publications. But there have also been a number of productions.
Yeah,
You can hear me? Okay. Before this time, there actually had been 2 silent versions of David Copperfield. Before the first talkie version in 1935. It starred W.C. Fields, Lionel Barrymore, Maureen O'Sullivan, just to name a few. So these are names. From these names, it was obvious that this was, you know, considered a good story they were going to make from the very beginning. This was the one I bought for the library, and it was actually a BBC one made masterpiece theater one made for TV, and it's a little bit longer version, 3-hour version, somewhere between 3 and 4 hours, and so they were able to get the story in better than in a shorter theatrical version movie. And this one had Bob Hoskins in it. You may see him there playing Mr. Micawber. And the young David Copperfield, anybody recognize that, who that is?
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter. We might know him as Daniel Radcliffe. But this was before Harry Potter, when he played this young version of David Copperfield. And Maggie Smith is in there as Aunt Betsy Trotwood. So that was a good one. And then I saw this one in the theater, but it was filmed in 2018. It was coming out then, early in 2020. Anybody going to the theater much in 2020?
No.
No. Well, I really wanted to see this, so I put my mask on. And I think there were 2 other people in the theater while I was there. But I did enjoy it. It's a quirky version of it. Not quite as accurate to the book as this middle one. So if later on you feel like you'd like to see it, you can find it like on Amazon, or we have the video here if you still have a video player. Things keep changing on us. Okay, now I am going to turn this over now to, I do want to say, this last one, on Rotten Tomatoes, they gave it a 92% rating. So the critics' consensus was that it was fresh, funny, and utterly charming spin on Dickens' classic, proving some stories truly are timeless. And but it didn't get a lot of, not a lot of people seeing it because of the timing on it.
You can keep it because I just have one and then you're going to get it again.
Okay.
So let's talk about Barbara Kingsolver. She is obviously a contemporary writer and lived a life not unlike many of us have lived in many ways. She won the Pulitzer Prize for Demon Copperhead in 2023, the Pulitzer Prize for fiction writing. She grew up in Kentucky, and she said she wanted to write about the Appalachian people because she calls herself an Appalachian. She said, "This is my identity, this is my home," where she grew up. However, many of you may have read another one of her books, The Poisonwood Bible, which she wrote some 20 years before she wrote Demon Copperhead, and it is fashioned upon the part of her childhood where she grew up when her parents were missionaries, and she was in the Congo. Is that right? Yes. So it's a very different book, but she struggled for at least 3 years with the idea of writing Demon Copperhead because she wanted to write about where she felt in her soul was home, and that was in Appalachia.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more about David Copperfield since it's our basis or our framework for the book Demon Copperhead, and then we'll spend more time talking about Demon Copperhead. That's probably the ones we've read it more recently, right? So, this is the first lines of David Copperhead. Field. And I do think he has some humor in here. To me, it's just sort of funny. Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show. To begin my life with the beginning of my life, I record that I was born, as I've been informed. Of course, he wasn't there at the time, wasn't able to put it down at the time, and believe on a Friday at 12 o'clock at night, it was remarked that the clock began to strike and I began to cry simultaneously. Okay, that's one way of writing. Let's see the first line of Demon, these names, Demon Copperhead. So that's how we start out. So you can see right off that there's going to be some differences in style and voice. I think we'll be going more into the voice part when Deborah's talking to you. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through the list of characters that you find that you can match to the two books. Did anybody try to keep track of that when you were reading it? Okay. So the corresponding characters. First, we've got the mother. We've got Clara Copperfield, and I don't know if we ever heard the first name of his mother or not, but even in the summaries and all, she was just listed as Mom Fields. So his actual last name is not Copperhead, it's Fields. But that was his nickname because of his hair. They're both married young. They both lose the father of their child early on, in fact, before he is born. So she has that commonality. But Clara is just young and not very mature. She seems sort of naive. Whereas Demon's mother has a drug problem. So that's, there's a connection there. There's a similarity, but there's also big differences in them. We have these families, the Peggotty family in the Copperfield, and there was a family maid, and then Peggotty, and she's usually just called Peggotty, and then she takes David to visit her family in Yarmouth, another part of England. So it's not a next-door neighbor the way the Peggott family is to Demon in the other book, in the Copperhead book. And there's quite a large family. I really couldn't even keep track of who all was in that family. Didn't anybody else have that problem? And it was interesting how she used the names. The stepfather in Copperfield is Mr. Murdstone, and he was a real creep from the very beginning. And I didn't realize this till I was re-looking at this again, but even the first husband that Clara had, it said was double her age. And she was just not quite 20 and then married somebody double her age. So she kind of went for the older guy again the second time around, who had convinced her he would make things easier for her. And then the stepfather, we've got a similar name, but it's Stoner. Of course, there's another meaning for Stoner. And so she had that. And he was also a bad stepfather and caused both problems. Both of them caused problems in the book. Next, there's a teacher that gives David problems, and Crickson at the first foster home placement. He was a real piece of work. There was a Tommy that was in each book that was a friend, a true friend. And then we had the false friend, James Steerforth in Copperfield, and Fast Forward in Copperhead. And they both cause problems. And they cause problems in relation to in little Emily in Copperfield and Emma in Copperhead. They lead her astray. So that's not even the end of it. Then we have the Macaubers, which in Copperfield, they are very comic figures. And the Macabres, I would say, were not so comic. In both cases, the men thought they had high visions of making a lot of money with some scheme, which never worked out. Never worked out. And they both had a wife who said, "I declare I will stay with them forever. Doesn't matter. Yes, they're gonna make it good here one of these days." And they both families had a lot of children. But the Macaubers really treated David as a family member. I mean, he was at the table eating with them. And now it's true, like the others, they made him go try to sell things at the pawn shop and stuff like that. But the Macaubes, didn't even feed him half the time and made him sleep in the utility room, on the floor in the utility room. Come on, give me a break. And they were in it for just the money they could get for being a foster parent. We've got Betsy Trotwood, who is David's great aunt, and Betsy Woodall, Demon's grandmother. She was really a little more in the story, I thought, in Copperfield than she was in Copperhead. And she had a brother or friend or somebody that lived with her, Mr. Dick and Dick. And in both cases, they were infirm in some way. In Copperhead, that man's in a wheelchair. In Copperfield, he's just sort of simple-minded, I guess I'll call it. But they are kind and generous people in both cases. We had Mr. Wickfield, who is a lawyer, and he boards David after his aunt gets him back in school again. He's had to run away, and she helps him get back on the education direction. And Coach Winfield, yeah, he's kind of she boards with him. He's kind of a father figure. He's a little more interested in football than in the education that Demon is getting. So he's kind of a good guy, but he's also not as fully invested as he could be. In each case, there was a daughter of Mr. Wickfield and Coach Winfield. This one was Agnes, and that one was Angus. That was a weird name to give her. Who's a foster sister and later a friend and a love. Uriah Heep. Now, I think of Uriah Heep as being one of the squeamiest people I've ever read about in literature. Uriah Heep. And they call him U-Haul, and the character that is equal to him is U-Haul. And in both cases, they scheme and embezzle and are employees. In Copperfield, he's the employee of Wickfield, and in Copperhead, he's the employee of Coach Winfield. And he ends up creating grief for them. We have just a couple more here. We have Dora and Dory. And these are the loves in each case. And they were both very... Who do they remind you of? Who do they remind you of?
Very immature.
Very immature. But who did we already talk about being immature?
Clara.
Mm-hmm. So Dora really seems a whole lot like David's mother. So he apparently was sort of drawn to that type of person, and Dory was like that, sort of like that in Demon Copperhead. She had the additional problem though of drugs. Drugs, yes. And then Ham Peggotty, who was also in love with Emily, besides Steerforth and Fast Forward. But he ends up, he seems to have a little bit bigger part in Copperfield than he does in Copperhead, but he has a tragic end at the end. So all of those, and there were actually a few more that they didn't have as big a parts that I didn't even put on this list. So it was really, for me, reading it, once I realized how much of that was in there, I was enjoying finding these different connections. The Ropes and Ranch Book Club read Copperhead a few months ago and had a book discussion of it, and I went to it just to see what they had to say, and most of them did not like the book, and they thought it was very, very sad. Now, I'm sure Deborah will be asking you your opinions of it, but I had so much, at that point, I had only read about halfway through it, And I was having so much fun seeing these connections that I was enjoying it. But about halfway through, of course, things go really downhill, for those of you who've read it know. And I think that's one way these two books diverge. I think in David Copperfield, really after about halfway through, he's back in school. He does have some issues because he marries little Dora and she's not really quite the helpmeet he needs, and she does pass away, so he has to deal with that. But he wasn't on drugs, and he didn't have the kind of issues that Demon had to deal with. Right. So I feel like they really diverged at that point. So I want to mention one other connection, which is not a person connection, but the Australia connection. Anybody have any clue about the Australia connection? Okay. Near the end of David Copperfield, the Macaubers, who've had so much problems because he keeps spending more. He keeps telling David, don't spend more than you make, but he keeps doing it. And so he keeps having problems. And little Emily, who's been rescued from the bad life she had gotten into, and Mr. Peggotty, they all go off to Australia to make a new life. And near the end of the book, David does hear that they're all doing well and having a good life. Okay, so now that I've told you that, do you remember the Australian connection that comes up at the end of Copperhead?
There's a family.
Exactly.
A family having a picnic.
Yes. Yes.
Place where Copperhead's dad died.
Yes. Near the end of the book, Demon goes to visit this Devil's Lake or Devil's Swimming Hole or whatever it is, where his father had died. And there's a nice little family, mother, father, and a couple of kids, having a picnic. And they are from Australia. And I thought, look how she brought that in. So that was a lot of fun. So that is my talk of David Copperfield. I don't know if anybody has a question or anything about this, and we'll move on to what I consider the main book of the talk.
Thank you. So, will you give me one more click, Elaine, and we'll talk. Thank you. We will talk about Demon Copperhead. King Solver never showed us any illustration of what Demon looks like, but in my mind, I found this picture, and in my mind, this is how I see him as he got a little older. Many times he ran away as really a young child, 10 years old, but this is the way I pictured him as he got older. So let's talk about now, when I was reading Demon Copperhead, I did not remember character for character how inspired she was by David Copperfield, but she says that Charles Dickens showed her the way into this story. Now, she'd been struggling to write it. She'd been thinking, and her mind was churning for 3 years about how she was going to tell the story that she wanted to tell about Appalachia. So she was in the UK, and she was visiting Dickens' summer house, which he wrote about, called Bleak House. And currently, it is operated as a little bed and breakfast, so any of us could go stay in Charles Dickens' house in Broadstairs, United Kingdom. So she was staying in this little bed and breakfast that was Bleak House. She sat down at the desk in the room where Charles Dickens wrote. And that's when she said Charles Dickens spoke to her. And he told her to tell the story from the child's point of view. and then it just clicked, and all of a sudden she could write. And she decided that she would model it, and indeed we see how she did model it after David Copperfield. And after 3 years of struggling, she began writing it that very night at his, Charles Dickens' former desk. Pretty interesting. So in telling the story of Demon Copperhead, Barbara Kingsolver really exposes the problems in Appalachia at the time. She's very aware of society, I will say American society's view of Appalachia as being poor, uneducated people. But she wanted to include other issues that were going on in Appalachia, and not through the fault of the people themselves. So she certainly exposes the problems of generational and institutional poverty, which we saw in Copperfield, but we certainly saw it in Demon Copperhead. The exploitation of the rural working class. We saw that. The failure of society to protect their children. How many foster homes did Demon get sent to where he was abused or mistreated? He was used as child labor. He was denied food. He was denied a simple bed, and he slept on the floor in the laundry room. The failure of the foster care system, which Dickens talked about, is still going on in America today with problems with the foster care system. And certainly in the state of Texas, we're not absolved from that either. It's not just in Appalachia. What we see now, currently, in Appalachia, Dickens saw in Victorian England. So, Barbara Kingsolver said she wanted to tell the bigger story of how the region was exploited by big capital. She wanted to tell the story about the orphans and the opioid epidemic that really wreaked havoc over an entire generation of peoples in Appalachia. So first came, and I guess I want to stop and say that you may have a version of where is Appalachia, but in the book she talks about Lee County. But essentially, for tonight, when we're talking about Appalachia, we're talking about the general region of Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia. So particularly in West Virginia, first came the regional coal mines. It used to be that coal mining was an extremely labor-intensive, very dangerous job to have, until the big coal mines came into operation and put in machinery instead of people, and the people lost their jobs. Sometimes it was an entire town that the people worked in the mines, and when the miners themselves were laid off because of the mechanics, the machines that were coming in to do the mining, then the residents lost everything. I'm going to tell you that I have coal miners in my personal background. My grandpa on my father's side was a coal miner, and I have uncles who were coal miners, and it truly was, the whole town was dependent on the coal mining business. These people, the large coal mining companies set up general stores. They charged inflated prices. The people paid through payroll deduction. So when they got a check, they went to the general store, The general store took money out of their paycheck. By the time they paid these inflated prices that the mining company was charging them, they didn't have anything else to take home to their wives. It's that whole system. So when the machinery came into coal mining and the men were laid off from the mines, they closed the general stores. No need to have the general stores anymore, and the town just was nothing. There was literally nothing. Next, King Solver wanted to talk about the opioid epidemic in America, which is said to have started in West Virginia. We know a lot about it now, but when it first started happening, people really didn't understand what was happening. But in the book, June, who was the nurse practitioner, she was kind of the alertist, the alarmist, talking about the drug companies pushing these opioids onto the miners. So Appalachia, really, it's been proven 20 years later that Appalachia became a target of Purdue Pharma, who created OxyContin, which was the big drug that started the opioid epidemic. Purdue Pharma studied the demographics of the United States. They are a drug-producing, money-making company. They wanted to sell their drugs in the best places that they possibly could. So, coal mining being a very labor-intensive job created many injuries in the miners. Not only did they have black lung, which gave them lung cancer, it's really what black lung is, but they had pain from these back-breaking jobs that they did. So Purdue Pharma, in their marketing, looked at, well, we are going to see which doctors in the United States prescribe the most pain relievers, and they targeted Appalachia, and they marketed OxyContin, saying that OxyContin was a non-addictive pain medication. That was their claim. We all know now that that was not the truth, but it took years for the CDC and the general public to understand what OxyContin was doing. The CDC released statistics in 2016, and just looking at the state of West Virginia, which was one of the first states to sue Purdue Pharma, just looking at West Virginia, they had the highest number of drug overdose deaths in the country during this time, late 1990s, early 2000s, like 2000 to 2010. Twice the number of deaths caused by motor vehicle accidents in the state. And the foster care system in West Virginia, and I'm only using West Virginia as one example of the whole of Appalachia, the foster care system experienced a 70% increase over 6 years in the early 2000s, with about 85% of the children who were in state custody having at least one parent who had a substance abuse disorder. So if you will remember, Dory, who was Demon's first love, her father was taking pain medications. She was not in school because she was caring for her father, and she started stealing his pain patches. And, drug addicts live a horrible life, and they scrape the medications off of these pain patches and eat those scrapings. And that is how Dory became addicted, and consequently Demon became addicted. So once again, King Solver saw all of this going on in her beloved region of Appalachia and wanted to bring it to the forefront of the country to understand that the Appalachians did not do this to themselves. There were big companies that really took down the region. So the automation of the coal mines meant the end of any sort of economic increase in Appalachia. So they couldn't adequately support their foster care systems. They couldn't provide quality education in their schools because they had no money. They had no money coming in. The region really became the dictionary definition of institutional and generational poverty, and it was such a shame. When all of this finally was beginning to come to light, then the state of West Virginia was one of the first states to sue the Sackler family, who were the owners of Purdue Pharma. And you will remember in the book, June, who was a nurse practitioner, was constantly talking about the big drug companies and that they were bringing the evil into Demon's home. So the state of West Virginia was one of the first ones to sue in 2020. So we're talking about really 15 to 20 years after Purdue Pharma started their marketing campaign. The Justice Department announced a global resolution of both criminal and civil investigations into Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family, and they were required to pay $4.3 billion and to give up control of Purdue Pharma. So, in the book, this is a quote from Demon. Demon says, "I tried to think of one place on the planet where I could feel happy, and I came up bust. Then I tried to settle on some place I could stand to be, and nothing again. A guy could take this to mean he ought to be dead." So what a horrible thought of a kid that's like 12 years old. It's so sad, isn't it? But
Well, he was a little older by
maybe
this time.
14.
This was,
Yeah.
well, he'd done high school and he'd football and,
Yes,
and
yes.
hurt his leg,
Right.
his knee, when he
Right.
really got into the drugs. But
Yep. Yep.
Doctor prescribed, yeah.
Yeah. Doctor prescribed drugs. Yes. For athletic
And-
athletes. Yes.
And then the doctor was later in passing it on to
Right. Right.
illegally.
Yes.
If the large companies came in and put the coal miners out of business, where did they get money for their prescriptions?
Medicaid.
Sometimes it was Medicaid. Sometimes you had what the healthcare industry knows as pain relief clinics, where doctors will write prescriptions to anybody off the street, and these pain relief clinics, literally starting at 7 in the morning, have homeless people in lines out the door paying $10 to get a prescription from this doctor.
But where do they even get, I mean, I know four.
Yeah.
Where do they even get $10?
Some did some disability, some theft. I mean, remember when Demon worked at the what was later, he realized later was an up and coming meth lab. Remember when he was sorting trash? You sort trash and you sell the metal, and people, how, remember when we had a rash of copper being stolen, air conditioned parts from people's houses, and some sort of car parts from your car? Desperate people will find anything to trade or sell. And unfortunately, we also saw a little bit of sex trafficking in Demon Copperhead when I can't remember now if it was Dory or Emmy, but one of them who was addicted then, Emmy,
Yeah.
worked with Fast Forward.
Yeah.
And they didn't come out, King Solver didn't come out and actually say it, but it was insinuated that Emmy sold her body for drugs.
I think
Yeah.
she was sex trafficked.
Yes, yes, she was sex trafficked by Fast Forward.
Yeah.
Yes, yep, yep. So, I think, even though so many people say that this is such a sad and depressing book, I love the resilience of Demon. Even when he was a young child and running away for the first time at 10 years old, do you remember when he was in that truck stop and the prostitute stole his money? And he worked so hard for that money, and she just, boy, she took him for all that he was worth, poor kid. But I love his resiliency, and even when he was down as low as he could get, he said, you have to get up every morning and decide again in the cold, lonely light of day, am I brave enough to stick this out? What do you think about that quote? I think it shows true resiliency. And thank God that King Solver took us all the way to the end where we could see his resurrection, if you will, that he did grow up, he did get older, he did conquer his own demons, as his nickname was brought upon him. And he and which girlfriend?
Angus.
Angus, yes, not a girlfriend, but a friend, or maybe a girlfriend, we don't know.
Sister.
Angus, yes, his stepsister, foster sister, yes. That he and Angus went to go find the ocean, which was always a part of his childhood dreaming.
And if that's going to follow this, and if that's going to follow the Copperfield story,
Yes.
they will marry, because in Copperfield he married Agnes, and they had several children. So
Yep. So let me take you through some additional reading that some of it that I have done to help educate me about this story. The book called Dope Sick is an incredibly well-researched book. Dope Sick, Dealers, Doctors, and the Drug Company That Addicted America by Beth Macy. Counting Down, a memoir of foster parenting and beyond. And Fall or Fly, the strangely hopeful story of foster care and adoption in Appalachia. And then the book by J.D. Vance called Hillbilly Elegy. I think that these are excellent books if you want to do some additional reading. And if you'd rather do some additional streaming, they did make a movie out of the book, Dope Sick. It was and it still is, you can find it on Hulu. It's an incredibly good and realistic look of the book, Dope Sick. It's a miniseries starring Michael Keaton as an Appalachian doctor who dealt with all of this opioid addiction and the opioid epidemic. And then, of course, more recently it was beforehand, but it just got popular on Netflix, say in the last 2 years, Hillbilly Elegy, which is the movie about the book written by J.D. Vance, and Glenn Close stars as the mother in that movie. So
she's actually the grandmother.
Oh, thank you, the grandmother. They are very good movies to watch that talk about this Appalachian region.
And we do have Hillbilly Elegy as a book in our
The book.
collection. I don't think we have any of those other books.
I don't think we have.
Do we?
No, I do not think we have
Maybe
those.
we should have, but anyway,
Yeah.
we have
Yeah.
Hillbilly Elegy.
Yeah. So, what questions do you have? What would you like to talk about that perhaps Elaine and I have not hit upon? Richard, yes.
What's King Solver's background, training, education?
Oh, thank you. This is very interesting. King Solver went to school and studied science. She was a biologist, and she wanted to go into like environmental biology, which somewhat that sort of seed in her brain came about when her parents were missionaries in the Congo, and she learned about, making food and using plants and using all of your natural habitat to survive, which is what she learned when her parents were missionaries in the Congo. So when she went to college, she got a degree in biology, and she had no intention of writing. But she was bored with the jobs that she got in biology, and somehow found the time when her children were young to begin writing. Kind of hard to imagine, but she put herself in a closet actually when her children were young, and she started to write. Thank you, Richard. That was a good question.
She has a real variety of books
Yes,
too. I mean,
yes.
she's written some shorter comic books, and not I don't mean graphic novels, but books that have more humor in them.
Yeah.
Poisonwood Bible was not one of those.
No,
So,
that was a good book.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Very
is.
popular
well,
book.
what y'all think of Demon? And do you think if he hadn't got that knee injury, he'd have it'd been different for him?
One thing I always wondered if he was dark skinned, because it talked about that
Right.
population of
Um,
mixed races.
Yes, they are called
Mulattoes?
No, it's not mulatto. It's a
Menuchen
different one.
or something like
It's a
that.
Melungeon?
Melungeon. Thank you. And it started like Louisiana, the Louisiana people that were French Cajun. So the Melungeon people had a little bit darker skin, but they had light eyes, green or blue eyes, and often had red hair. A very different racial mix. And if you were Melungeon in Appalachia, people recognized that. And that is how Demon got both of his nicknames. His birth name was Damon Fields. His nickname was Demon because of the evil way he really came into the world with his birth father dead from an alcohol-induced accident, and at this devil's cave, devil's lake, I can't remember where it was, and his mother being drug and alcohol addicted when he was born. So that's where the Demon nickname came from, Damon, and Copperhead because of his bright red hair, and freckles, which was also an odd part of the Melungeon racial mix. Yeah.
Which was black, white, Indian, and
Yes,
Cherokee.
there was Indian, American Indian, yes, in there as well. Yes, thank you.
Well, I keep thinking that maybe if he hadn't had that football injury, that leg thing, his knee, that maybe he wouldn't have gotten into the drugs.
Well, that was the doctor
Yeah.
that gave him that, prescribed that, and June, who was the nurse practitioner, was trying to warn against that.
Right,
But the coach trusted that doctor, so.
right. And big,
And then, of course, Dory
well,
didn't help.
the big business of athletics in our country, certainly pushes drugs over health, pushing through pain via drugs to make money, to win the trophies, and on and
Get
on.
back in the game.
Yeah, get back in the game. Yes, there you go. That's a good way to say it.
Also, it was June's boyfriend.
Right.
That was the sales rep.
Yes.
For that
Right.
company.
Yes.
And she caught on after a while because they tried to give it to Mr.
Mm-hmm.
Peggott.
Mm-hmm. Mr.
And
Paget.
Mrs.
Yep.
Peggott said, "I'm throwing that coupon in the trash." was
She
smart
sure
about
did.
it.
She did. But June really was, an early alertist to the situation. And it's amazing that she grew up in the same family and was raised and became this wonderful healthcare professional, um, and and tried to save things, but couldn't. Although she did save Emmy. She adopted Emmy when June was only 19 years old when she legally took care and charge of Emmy. June was an amazing character in the book. Amazing.
So do you, how did Demon come out of this? What was his skill that he was able to do?
I think sometimes I have observed that sometimes children born into horrible, horrible circumstances, in today's world, so much of it is dependent upon drugs and alcohol. And sometimes the strongest people, children, are born. And they just, I don't know if it's just something that's God given to them, or I don't know, because most of the time when kids are born into those situations, they just, it's pretty hard to get back out of it.
Right.
Yes,
right.
that is part of the generational poverty.
Mm-hmm.
If your parents are addicted and then you become addicted and then you have kids that you didn't particularly want, but because you were drug addicted, oh, here comes my girlfriend's pregnant. I mean, it sometimes is very much generational and hard to overcome. But remember that Demon did have a skill, and I think this is where Elaine is going. He was an artist. He was able to draw, remember? And he got the job with Tommy and got some of those graphic art comics published in a reputable newspaper.
Remember what he called his hero? What was the name he gave his superhero?
Oh,
Redneck.
Redneck.
So, but he gave Redneck a cape, and he could
Yep.
jump over mountains.
Yep.
And he was there to help people, which was a real kind of a twist on the term of redneck.
Yeah. But again, interesting of his resiliency. He had so many factors going against him, but in his mind, he could create a superhero character that could, save his world. But in the end, he really saved himself.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you said, he saved himself.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I just think it's interesting that June chooses to go back, and she calls going back going home.
Yes.
And
Yes.
You brought that up at the very beginning about the author,
Right.
saying this
This is my home. This is my
So,
identity. Yes.
Yeah, I think that
Yes.
the author, didn't want us to hate this place. She
Right.
wants to see
Absolutely.
that there's somebody who has seen the world, and they're choosing.
Yes. Much like King Solver herself, she'd lived in many different places, but she said, this is my home, this is my identity. And you're right, I never thought about that. But June, who was well educated, had years of good experience, could have gotten a job elsewhere, but she chose to come back. You're right.
How did Demon feel about the place?
Yeah, he loved it.
He loved
Which
it.
is beautiful, particularly if you've been to Virginia.
Yes.
And I spent 35 years in the North Georgia mountains, and
Oh.
that's southern Appalachia, and it's beautiful.
It is beautiful
Yeah.
country.
We spent 25 years in North Carolina and driving
Yeah.
the Blue Ridge Parkway.
Yeah.
And really loved it too. But Demon had to go away. How long did he stay away? Do you remember?
3.5 years.
3.5 years he stayed away, getting sober, living in a halfway house, you know,
Yep.
marking that time. And then he was invited to go back, and he wanted to. He said, he just wished he could live a normal life and be there, but he was afraid if he went back where he had been an addict that he would fall into it again.
Right. Right.
But he went back, and what happened?
Well, we hope that he went on to see the ocean and get married, and he was really by that time a contributor to society, a successful contributor to society. But you're right. It's in your soul. It was in King Solver's soul to be an Appalachian. It was in Demon. She made the character Demon have it in his soul to be in Appalachia.
Do you remember what Angus
Yeah,
was
Angus.
studying to be?
Nope.
She had graduated college. She wanted to go on to graduate school. I think she was talking about being a social worker, which
Social
which is
worker,
right,
okay.
right.
Psychology.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean that's
And her name really was Agnes.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. But they called her, and she called herself.
Copperfield.
Yes. It was a nickname.
Yeah.
And so many of them went by their nicknames, like Maggot and, and many of his friends.
fast
Yes.
forward,
Yeah.
hammer.
U-Haul, yeah.
Yeah, is
Stoner, yes. Uh-huh. But isn't it interesting that all those nicknames had a reason? I mean, there was a reason why they were called by those nicknames.
And
Yes.
you know, it did not hit me till we looked at this list. Demon's mother's name was what? Field. Copperfield.
Yep. Yep.
So
Yep.
did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I just was, she's a very talented writer,
Oh.
and I just was amazed that she was doing the whole thing with the boys' point of view. I felt it rang true, but if she had never read Copperfield, she could have just written this without using all the names and all the
Yes,
spaces.
right.
I don't know why, and there's no plagiarism involved as far as her being charged. I mean, I don't know how that works.
Well,
Just
if
didn't understand why.
she obviously is very talented,
Oh my gosh,
but
She's everything.
if you believe that as she believes that Charles Dickens spoke to
So she
her
really felt that way.
and told her to write the book from the child's point of view, it was like then it clicked in her mind, and she went with it.
Part of that quote that I read was that no one doubts the child.
Ah,
That's what he
yes.
told them, because no one doubts the child.
Yes, an adult would have things that would already have formed opinions.
An adult would have ulterior motives.
Yes,
But no one would doubt a child telling
the
you
perspective
this
of a child. Interesting, yes, very interesting. That's what being a talented writer is all about, right?
Because I had just watched this movie before I was reading it, and poor old David, when he ran away from the Macaubers and then he got robbed, and then he finally found his way to Aunt Betsy's house. When Demon runs away from after he's been with the Macaubes,
Right.
I thought, uh-oh, now he's going to get robbed. I just knew that's what
And
was
he
coming.
did, yes,
And of course
and he
it
did.
was.
Yep, yep, yep. Well, if there are no more questions, thank you for your time and interest. If you haven't read the book, I certainly would recommend it. If you have read the book, I'm glad you came for the discussion. I absolutely love the book. I guess you can't tell that, can you? I absolutely loved it. So now I'll have to go back and read Copperfield again.
Or at least watch the movie.
Yes, yes. So, thank you indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Yes. And our next talk, this is the last one we're doing at 6:30 in the evening this year. Our next talk is a nonfiction book called An Immense World, How Animal Senses Reveal the Hidden Realms Around Us. That will be on September 18th at 2:30 in the afternoon. So we hope to see you then.
And Jane Schultz is presenting that, and if you've heard her do any before, she's a very good presenter.
Thanks.